Hallelujah. The Real Housewives of Orange County is good again. I absolutely love season 17, so let's discuss it. I've got a lot to say, so let's jump right in. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Let's start with the conflict this season started with Shannon versus Tamra. So to review, the two had been friends, soulmate sisters for the 6 seasons they had previously shared, albeit with a few bumps in the road. But when Tammy Sue got fired, a press war broke out between the two. Tamra's perspective was that she had always been there for Shannon, constantly dropping everything to talk to her whenever Shannon was melting down, which was often, but when Tamra had her time of need, Shannon didn't answer her calls. On top of being fired, she was also dealing with her ex-husband being diagnosed with cancer and was really struggling and needed a friend. She felt that Shannon didn't care about her now that she wasn't on the show, something she was already feeling insecure about. Shannon, however, felt like maybe she missed a few calls, but it wasn't intentional and wasn't malicious. She was planning on getting back to Tamra, but before she could, Tamra started attacking her in the press. The situation escalated until it was an all-out hate-fest war, so when it was announced that Tamra was coming back, we knew some shit was about to go down. I was pretty interested to see how all of this would unfold. As someone who's quote-unquote studied Tamra as a housewife, I felt pretty confident that Tamra would make Shannon suffer a bit, but then ultimately pull her back to her side, and I ended up being proven right. Tamra, more than anyone else, plays housewives like it's a social strategy game like Big Brother or Survivor. She's really good at knowing when to hold on to info and when to release it, and she's really good at knowing who she needs as an ally and how to get them on her side. Shannon is a very key ally for Tamra, given her loyal nature and the fact that she's locked into the show long-term, given her kookiness, so of course Tamra wanted her back in her good graces. Tamra is also someone who above all else seems to want what's best for the show, and I think she knows that a larger part of the audience likes seeing them as friends rather than enemies. So yeah, with Tamra's return, we saw her being very vicious about Shannon behind her back.
She's a self-centered person that only gives a about herself.
Well, how about when she finally saw her, she kind of just broke down at the sight of her. Shannon tried to stay strong and not let her back in right away, but by the early trip to Montana, Tamra had reeled her back in, and the two were taking shots and whooping it up for the rest of the season. Going into this, I was kind of team I see both sides. I can see why Tamra would be hurt at Shannon seeming to turn her back on her, especially when she may have been feeling a bit insecure about being fired. Tamra had been harping for years on how Shannon would call her crying at all hours, something that would come up again later this season, so I can see how she'd feel like she'd gone above and beyond for Shannon, yet when she had her own time of need, she was getting radio silence. But I can also see from Shannon's perspective that she wasn't turning her back on her, just wasn't immediately dropping everything for Tamra. I can see it being hypocritical that she'd seemingly expect others to drop everything for her, or at least call them at kind of inappropriate times, yet wasn't returning that same passion towards her friends, but I also know that it's kind of just human nature to be hypocritical and justify our actions when we do something, yet feel hurt when others do the same. I also think that Tamra went way harder than was necessary in her attacks in the press of Shannon. We had gotten the idea, yet she just kept going, but Tamra is known for her viciousness. We'll delve more into this later. But I ultimately think Shannon and Tamra are more fun to watch when they're friends, and with Vicki's pop-up appearances this season, it was good to see the Tres Amigas back together. They're also not really evenly matched when they're fighting. It's more mean, vicious Tamra attacking poor broken bird Shannon, so their fights, while feeling deep and real, aren't all that fun to watch. But let's move on to one of the biggest stories of this season, the Jenn and Ryan affair situation. So Jenn, of course, joined the show by way of Tamra, who she had met at her gym years back, but tension entered the friendship when Tamra and her husband Eddie were told Jenn was cheating on her husband Will with this dude Ryan, who also went to her gym. When the season began, it didn't take long for the rumor mill to start spinning, and Jenn spent the entirety of the season answering questions with Tamra standing behind her, screaming at her to just be honest. I found this to be incredibly juicy and weirdly nuanced, despite on the surface being a clear case of right and wrong. And it really drove the season, taking twists and turns as the ladies reacted to the whole debacle. The story kind of has spin-off stories, so let's go into each of them. First, the Gina of it all. Now, Gina found the affair to be incredibly triggering. If you remember, when she first joined, she had this off-camera husband, Matt, who we never saw because he lived in LA during the week while working and his job didn't allow him to film, making it not super surprising when she finally revealed that the two were splitting up. The reasons why were left a little vague, coming together a bit more when she finally opened up about the fact that he had had an affair. We'd get bits and pieces the next few seasons, but it was seeming like she wasn't fully dealing with it, as she was also having to deal with legal issues, both her own and her ex's. With all that behind her this year, the emotions around the affair started to come to the surface a bit more, and her decision to quit drinking meant she couldn't mask the feelings the way she could in the past. So when the affair talk surrounding Jenn started, even though Gina kind of started it herself, but whatever, she started to break down. I saw a lot of chatter of people being annoyed with Gina for making it about her, but I kind of get it. Gina hasn't shown herself to be someone who's super comfortable with her emotions, and we've seen from multiple housewives that when you cut alcohol out, a lot of stuff that was buried underneath the surface starts to leak out. Gina really opened up about how much her ex's infidelity affected her, and even though she's in such a great spot in life now, it still really damaged her self-esteem. I found her perspective to be really interesting, talking about the grief that comes along with it. She thought her life was going one way, then suddenly the rug was pulled out. I also really admired the way Jenn handled Gina with all of this. Gina was very open about how the situation triggered her, bringing it up to Jenn multiple times, with Jenn finally telling her that she hates that Gina is so upset, but she's not responsible for those emotions. I think this is a good wake-up call for a lot of us. A lot of the time we'll project our own stuff onto another person when that's not a fair thing to do. It was nice to see them work through this and come out pretty bonded over their shared trauma, even if they were on other ends of it. Another person who inserted themselves heavily into the Jenn affair was, of course, the queen of inserting herself into women's business, Tamra Judge. Now, it makes sense that Tamra would be so central in this whole affair, as she was present for a lot of the past stuff and had the detail to keep Jenn's story a little straighter when Jenn would start to obfuscate things. But Jesus Christ, Tamra, she really held nothing back. What's funny about this whole situation is I think ultimately Tamra is right in her meddling and her views on the situation, but she went about it in the worst possible way. Tamra's whole thing was that she understood the initial cheating. She more than anyone understands what it's like to be in a bad marriage and want a way out. It doesn't seem like Jenn's ex had the control factor that Tamra's ex had, but my impression was that Jenn had lost herself in the marriage and didn't feel loved and valued. Ryan brought back excitement and filled those emotional needs her ex didn't. Despite the fact that you should obviously end a relationship before starting a new one, it's understandable that Jenn would take action to take control of her happiness. I think Tamra didn't love that she cheated, but ultimately didn't falter until she found out Ryan was a total skis, not being faithful to anyone, including Jenn. She caught wind that Ryan had wanted to go after Tamra when he first saw her, confirming rumors that Ryan had a thing for married women. Tamra seems to have become disgusted that Jenn would upend her family for a guy like this, and I think that making Jenn see what a seemingly terrible partner Ryan was her goal. I think that's understandable. Ryan does seem kinda awful, and as we get to know Jenn and how inwardly beautiful she is, it becomes harder and harder to understand why she was so into him. She's so sweet and understanding and nurturing, and he just comes off as a sleaze. I'm sure he has great qualities, but I get not wanting your friend to fall down a bad path when he just doesn't seem worthy of her. Tamra dealt with this nearly identical situation when Vicki started dating Brooks, and that obviously turned out really, really bad for Vicki. So I do understand why it would be important for Tamra to want Jenn to see what she sees, but after a while it just started to become cruel. Jenn obviously sees something I don't in Ryan and knows full and well his history and continues to stay with him. She has all the information and is making the choice to be with him. Tamra and the gang have to accept that it's her decision, but Tamra just couldn't seem to accept this. Plus, she was just absolutely relentless and quite frankly cruel in her constant going after Jenn about this.
You ruined your whole family to go
I
with a
didn't
guy.
ruin my family. How dare you?
After a while, it seemed like it was less about getting Jenn to see the light and more about hurting her. There was definitely more beneath the surface. What that is, we can only speculate. I think part of it could be jealousy. Tamra made a comment about Jenn being the skinniest one,
Why do we have the skinniest girl on one side?
and Tamra has always placed a strong emphasis on weight,
You know I don't eat when it's summertime.
so there could be something there. Jenn also looks a lot like Tamra, so it could be fears of getting replaced with a newer model kind of thing, even though there's no replacing Miss Tammy Sue. There could also be some worry about her own secrets getting out, so she's launching a preemptive, offensive attack in order to silence Jenn. If that were the case, it doesn't seem to have worked because Jenn leaked that Tamra thought Ryan was hot before getting to know him, and I don't think that's a huge deal. Jenn also brought up rumors that Tamra cheated on her ex Simon with her current husband Eddie. This has been hashed out before, with Tamra maintaining that she'd already left Simon before getting with Eddie, even if the time between the two was very short. I think it's kind of a moot point, as Tamra and Eddie have been together for so long, and we all saw that Tamra and Simon had a terrible relationship. If there was some overlap, it is what it is. That's long in the past, so unless there's some current cheating going on, I don't think Jenn would really have much to expose that isn't already out there. It could also be that Tamra just kind of resents the situation, as maybe she felt it made her look bad. It made it look like Cut Fitness, rest in peace, has this seedy underbelly with all these cheating scandals. Plus, it made Tamra and Eddie seem kind of sketchy for knowing about this situation. I don't know, I'm just spitballing. It's also possible that Tamra knew it was juicy and wanted to make sure it was properly delved into on the show. It later comes up that Shannon was saying something similar, and given how much Tamra prioritizes making good TV, and I'd imagine definitely didn't want to blow her big comeback, it could just be that she went so hard for TV purposes. I think this maybe backfired a bit, as while it was certainly perversely entertaining, it made Tamra look really bad and made Jenn incredibly sympathetic, despite the crux of the issue being that she cheated on her husband with a dude who wears paint-splattered denim jackets. Despite making up at the reunion, it appears that the blood has gone bad between Tamra and Jenn and Ryan, so assuming we get everyone back next season, I'm sure we'll be hearing more about this. But let's bring some new ladies into the fold and talk about the IMDB showdown between Heather Paige Kent Dubrow and friend of Taylor Armstrong. Just to review, Taylor, now rebranding herself as an actress, was wanting to connect with Heather and offered her a part in a movie she was filming in Oklahoma.
It's a story about a concert pianist who was murdered.
Heather drunkenly showed some level of interest, I guess, but didn't realize Taylor took this as a binding contract to do the film and is kind of taken aback when Taylor gives her a script.
Oh my gosh, you're so cute.
Heather believes she politely declines the opportunity, which Taylor takes as a put down, and we're off to the races, with the two getting into it while dressed as cowgirls in Montana. In this conflict, I can kind of see both sides, but my sympathy lies a smidge more with Heather. I think Taylor was correct in feeling like Heather was being patronizing towards her movie, but she also approached it in a really unprofessional way. So I could see why Heather could feel almost insulted by the offer. Drunkenly asking someone to do a movie isn't binding, and I can see why Heather was put off that there was no formal offer or audition or contacting the agent or whatever else goes into hiring a professional actor. They both kind of unintentionally disrespected each other with the whole exchange, so it was mostly a wash for me. But then Heather caught wind that Tamra and Taylor were laughing at her IMDb credits.
Young and hungry. Is that a porn? I don't think so.
Claiming they were from the 1900s, and suddenly this conflict took on a whole new life. If I'm honest, I was kind of sharing the attitude of Tamra and Taylor that Heather's career wasn't that impressive for her to take so seriously. It seemed like it was all guest spots, often as a result of her being on Housewives and old stuff from the 90s, and I always found humor in how much cachet she put into a career that, at least to an outsider, didn't seem to amount to all this glory she gave it. But once Heather started to explain her history, I felt so bad about my previous attitude. She explains that she always had dreams to be an actress and was starting to see some success, but took some time off to focus on raising her kids and helping Terry build their dream life. She obviously really excels at being a wife, mom, and homemaker, but it's clear that she feels some sense of disappointment that her acting career wasn't as big as she may have one day dreamed. It seems like she views her decision to step back and focus on her family as an act of love and a sacrifice, so of course it's offensive when she finds out her friends are laughing at her in a way that exploits this wound. I feel like we haven't seen a lot of true vulnerability from Heather. She always seems so put together and has this air of having it all figured out, so this moment was powerful for me. It's a question a lot of women have wrangled with, having to make decisions that don't have an easy answer. Now, a lot of us aren't choosing between life as a Hollywood star or the wife of a plastic surgeon, but the question of career or home life is one that's been grappled with by many women throughout the course of history. It's also a very women-centered story. I know at this point a lot of us don't really have the option to be stay-at-home wives or mothers, so we don't have the choice to make anyway, but for a lot of our mothers or grandmothers, they may have also wondered what may have happened if they had their middle years to focus on building a career rather than a family. I don't know, I just wasn't expecting what started as something so silly to go into something so thoughtful and complex. But let's bring in Miss Shannon storms Beador and talk about her big conflict, the normal fights with her boyfriend that paralyze her, and all the talk around them. So it was season 15, I believe, that Shannon introduced the world to John Jansen, yet it was season 17 where we all kind of turned on him. Before he'd been kind of just there. I don't know, I had no opinion on him, which is why it came as a shock to me that he allegedly is with her because he loves being in the spotlight. Really? But let's back up. So, the minute the Tres Amigas got back together, Tamra let Shannon know that Heather is telling anyone who will listen, aka Emily and Gina, that Shannon and John's relationship was not good. Dun dun dun. Shannon freaks out, taking her mic off while screaming that her relationship is over. She tells us that she confided in Heather about something that happened in their relationship. It seemed a bit overly dramatic, which made the mystery of what he does all the more mysterious. Shannon is besides herself that Heather has been spreading these rumors, and Tamra does her best to stir this pot, baiting Heather to talk about Shannon's relationship with a witness present.
But I want to test her. See how far she'll lie.
Tamra's openly being evil, but Heather catches on, launching their Cold War, which I'm so excited to talk about soon. Emily gets roped into this, and suddenly everyone's talking about how Heather was talking about Shannon's relationship. When the two finally sit down, Heather dressed as Emily and Shannon dressed as Gina, Heather is shocked at the level this has gotten to. She doesn't get why she's being singled out, as everyone's been talking about Shannon's relationship, and that she's been very neutral about them. At this point, all hell is breaking loose, and Shannon is in full Storms mode, screaming about how she's not a crazy person, and that she has totally normal fights with her boyfriend that paralyze her. At this point, the situation is left so vague that your mind kind of fills in the blank with the worst possible scenario. Shannon is also losing her mind knowing that people are talking about this, which just ups the tension and made the situation way bigger than she probably intended. Heather, after more back and forth with Shannon, finally reveals what these bad things were.
Shannon pays for everything. The family dynamic isn't great. That he's never slept over. And his son lives with him, so she doesn't go over there.
After finding out the gossip, I could kind of see Shannon's point a bit. The things John were doing made him seem cruel and the two of them seem incompatible, but it wasn't anything to call the cops over. It kind of reminded me of the whole dark comments thing between Crystal and Sutton on Beverly Hills season 12. When you apply that there's all this doom and gloom but won't reveal what it is, people are going to assume the worst. I also kind of wondered if it triggered her back to the van ride in Ireland where Kelly, by way of Vicki, said that David Beador was physically abusive, which really affected Shannon, so much so that she said the stress of this situation led to her gaining a significant amount of weight. Shannon doesn't seem to do well coping with rumors about her going around. We do actually see a lot of John and Shannon together this this season, and based on those scenes, it didn't particularly surprise me to find out that he broke up with her about a week after filming Wrapped. I'm not a matchmaker, but they're just not two people I would put together. I've never picked up on a great deal of chemistry between them. I can see that he's a relatively attractive man, and they've got their love of boats in common, but aside from that, he seems pretty dry and chaos-averse, which is obviously a glaring incompatibility with Miss Storm's Beador. I think Shannon needs someone who really wants to come into her life. A big issue is that he didn't want to spend a lot of time with her, and I think Shannon in particular needs someone who's happy to be on call for her. I hope she finds someone who delights in her frenzied nature and brings stability without dampening her light. Another big issue this season was this alleged loser comment made at Bravocon 2022. In the midst of Heather's HD Fireside Network launch party, which was meant to evoke the classy Dubrow lifestyle, Emily suddenly gets up in arms after hearing from Heather that Shannon was talking shit about her and Gina at Bravocon, but won't reveal what she said.
And then when I said, well, what did she say? She said, oh no, I can't tell you because it's in the vault. I'm just so irritated by her.
This swirls into a tornado of confusion as Emily has gotten a major detail wrong. Heather had said Tamra, not Shannon, was talking about her, but this misheard detail allows everyone in out to kind of play dumb for a little while, with Heather finally revealing in Mexico that it was in fact Tamra, not Shannon, who called them losers. Tamra is prepared for this moment and drops the mic by saying she was simply mocking what Heather had been saying. Heather says she was talking about season 16's Noella and Jen Armstrong, not Emily and Gina, and at this point it's like, oh my god. I don't know, it was just a lot of details to keep up with, and Emily mishearing Shannon instead of Tamra just added to my own confusion about what exactly happened. All this culminates in the general gang up on Heather, which is most on display during their cast trip to Mexico. It's just really brutal. Aside from the Shannon-John situation and the Bravocon loser comment, we see every single cast member take a jab against Miss Dubrow. It was kind of maddening to watch because it was so obvious to us viewers that this was almost completely as a result of Tamra's meddling, but to give the women the benefit of the doubt, they don't have the vantage point we do, and Tamra is really good at getting people on her side. Another part of the madness was a lot of the grievances the other women had didn't really make sense. I had trouble following what exactly the issue was until I was literally taking notes watching it, and even then it was kind of dumb. It seemed like either some behind the scenes stuff was bothering them or like mob mentality. Like a Tamra says we don't like Heather now, so we don't like Heather now kind of thing. Heather's finally able to get Gina back on her side, but only after having to play a clip of Tamra calling them losers on her podcast. Heather has heard that Gina was so quick to believe Tamra, and I think that's fair. We saw the two of them build a solid friendship last season, whereas Gina and Tamra have never been especially close, but in Gina's defense, she was probably hurt at the thought of Heather calling her a loser, and maybe felt that their friendship wasn't that rock solid, given that it was mostly forged as a result of being on the show, and we found out early on that they hadn't been talking much in the off-season. Gina also somehow thinks that Tamra isn't a liar, which is just not true. I'm a hardcore Tamra defender, I've made that clear, but like, come on, Gina. Emily is also weirdly aggressive with Heather. She clearly has some sort of resentment towards her, because even before everyone was going after Heather, Emily was picking fights and electing herself as a representative to let Heather know that she can be a bit condescending. Like, I'm sure Heather has watched the show back, she knows. She also gets super drunk at Heather's HD party and makes fun of her monogramming everything, which was meant to be a light jab, I know, but like, it was Heather's party with non-housewives there. You could have saved that joke for later. She was just really hardcore against Heather, and it just kind of made me wonder why. Maybe she feels some sort of resentment that there was all this buzz about Heather coming back to save the show last season, when she'd been on the show during the years it quote-unquote needed to be saved. Or it could be that Heather and Gina had gotten close the previous season. Maybe she was worried that Heather could come in between her friendship with Gina, or maybe she felt some sort of resentment that Heather didn't want to be closer to her. It could also be because Emily seems to really be taking the show seriously these past few years, and she saw an angle to stir up some drama, so she went for it. I don't know, let me know your theories on why Emily was so anti-Heather. My favorite scenario within the gang up was the Taylor of it all. Aside from the IMDB stuff early on, she takes umbrage with Heather falling asleep when they were meant to hang out in Mexico. She goes in for the big confrontation at the finale freak show party, but she's completely wasted, so it comes across just sloppy and weird, and nobody can follow her points.
Do not mess with me, because I will come.
It was just funny. So yeah, pretty rough roads for Heather, which was quite the change from last season when she was the queen bee. Obviously, the Dubrow takedown was almost exclusively as a result of Tamra. She worked her ass off to turn each cast member against Heather, which we'll get to later because this deserves a section of its own. We'll get to that soon. And in the interest of fairness, some things were her fault. It's absolutely not a compliment to call Emily a snuffleupagus, no matter how Heather tried to spin it, and I think there's some truth to the discussion at the reunion that Heather can't take a joke. She's really funny herself, but can't cope with being painted in any sort of negative of light, even when it's something benign like Emily mocking all the HDs at her party. She's very sensitive, which is understandable, but like, girl, you're on Real Housewives. I get wanting some things to be off limits, but I'm not sure her love of monogramming would count as below the belt. And I think she sometimes makes things a bigger deal than is necessary. Like, the whole following Emily on Instagram thing didn't need to elicit threats from Heather to quit the show. Maybe it was a buildup of the prior stuff, but it just seemed like an extreme reaction. It was a little worrying because I don't want Heather to leave the show, but it seems like based on Bravocon and the reunion that she's moved past that. I also know there's been a lot of buzz about her possibly moving to Beverly Hills, but I really hope this doesn't happen. OC needs her way more than Beverly Hills does, and she shines way more on OC. Even if she feels like an outsider on OC at times, I think she really fits in, and the show suffered in the years she was gone. But let's discuss Gina vs. Shannon, which had simmers during the season, some flare-ups on social media, and all had exploded at the reunion. They've always had kind of a rocky relationship, with Shannon not giving Gina the time of day until all of her preferred allies were off the show, then very nicely helped Gina when she was dealing with legal issues surrounding her DUI, which Shannon has held over Gina's head ever since. Despite promising not to bring it up again, Shannon drunkenly tells the group this season that she prevented Gina's kids from being taken away by CPS when she had a warrant out for her arrest. Gina is obviously super upset when this gets back to her, a claim Shannon denies until she can no longer do so. This turns into a big scene at the reunion. Gina explains that her kids are almost at the age of being able to go online, and she worries how they'll react to seeing claims like these. I'm pretty firmly team Gina regarding the comments. Shannon's excuse was she didn't remember saying the comment because she was drunk, which Gina points out is maybe a sign her drinking has officially crossed over into problematic territory. Shannon is pretty upset about Gina and the others questioning her drinking habits, but Shannon would get a DUI a few days after the reunion filmed, so I think they were right. We also had some squabbling on social media between the two, starting off with some silly banter about wearing the same skirt on Watch What Happens Live, escalating to more below-the-belt types of comments. Gina was extremely distraught over the CPS comment, saying she was questioning whether or not she would return to the show, but assuming she does, I think Gina vs. Shannon is a feud we can expect to continue next season. I'll get a bit more into this later with my predictions, but this is definitely a potential flashpoint to look for. And saving the best for last, the story that has me most excited for next season, Heather vs. Tamra. I had a feeling we'd see the two of them go up against each other. If you want to see predictions from the past, you can watch my video on how to save Real Housewives of Orange County, which was made shortly after season 16 ended, but before it was announced that Tamra would be returning. But yeah, even though they were always close in their previous stints on the show, aside from some tension early on in season 9, I wondered if their time away, as well as Heather experiencing the show without Tamra, could infuse a competitive dynamic into their friendship. I had predicted that Heather would be more of the aggressor, but that turned out not to be the case. Before the show started filming, before Tamra was even brought back, it was said on Heather's podcast that Tamra shouldn't come back because she commentates on the show on her own podcast. There were enough light jabs on both of their respective podcasts and in the press that I thought we could open with some sort of sit down between the two to address it, but it was all just ignored. They seemed to be good, with Tamra more focused on Shannon and Heather more focused on Gina early on, but slowly we started to see Tamra do some work to undermine Heather's relationships with the other women. Tamra riled Shannon up against Heather, asking her repeatedly, "Do you trust her?" and bringing up the talk about Shannon's relationship, so Shannon was pretty quickly turned. What was exciting to me about this was how quickly Heather caught on.
It's not like we sit around talking about Shannon's life all day. Why do you want to know now? And why in front of Jenn?
She knew Tamra had some angle in asking her thoughts on Shannon's relationship in front of Jenn, and didn't seem particularly surprised to find out Tamra had thrown her under the bus about the situation. Tamra, meanwhile, is gathering evidence that Heather, in fact, was talking about Shannon's relationship, which Heather immediately clocks.
What are you whispering, Tamra?
At this point, I kind of wondered if there was more chatter about Heather and Terry's relationship that was edited out, because around this time there were reports that there were tension between the two or that they were splitting up. Around this time, paparazzi photos came out of the Dubrows canoodling at Disneyland, which many people thought were staged. When the ladies take a trek to the pumpkin patch, Tamra comes clean that her podcast co-host Teddy Mellencamp was making fun of the pictures in her podcast, and Tamra kind of makes the implication that they're staged. Heather is pretty confrontational in asking if Tamra really believes this, which Tamra does, and even though this isn't a great big fight, it's a sign that their friendship is actively crumbling. This furthers when the ladies take a trip to Mexico. The news that Heather has sold her house has hit the press, and they all feel miffed that she withheld it, but the attacks start coming from Emily and Shannon, and Tamra swoops in as Heather's confidant. Behind her back, however, Tamra is riling Emily up about the Snuffleupagus comment, and though Tamra is a little busy terrorizing Jenn, she eventually sets her sights on Heather, stirring up the whole Bravocon loser comment. This escalates, and we see that Heather has a lot to back up what she's saying, but Tamra infuses such emotion and had done the work prior, priming the ladies to believe that Heather had been making fun of them. So almost Plus, everyone sides with Tamra besides surprisingly Vicki. Back in OC, everyone won't shut up about how much they hate Heather, but when she sits down with Gina, she's able to turn her back to her side and radicalizes her against Tamra. At the finale party, war officially breaks out. The two take turns pulling the other ladies aside and working to get them on their team. This was just insane to witness. Heather is having to work double duty, both making up with the women while also turning them against Tamra, and Tamra is scurrying around the party freaking out because she sees what's happening and wants it to stop. When the two finally face off, hatred is just emanating from the screen. They've had disagreements before, but it's never been like this. Heather is cold as ice, and it seems like she's seeing Tamra in a totally different way than ever before. Tamra is vicious, waving her finger in Heather's face and screaming in classic Tamra fashion.
Goodbye, bitch.
They end with these chilling confessionals questioning their friendships with the other. Heather even throws in that she thinks Tamra just wants to be top dog and she can have it. I had chills. Heather wears black to the neon-colored themed reunion and is mostly somber regarding the state of her friendship with Tamra. The two spar but clear things up and end the reunion deciding to be friends, but I don't know. I caught a vibe that this was just a momentary truce. I think they were true friends when they were initially on the show, but when both were eventually fired and they lost the proximity that kept them connected, something severed and they realized that their friendship was more about the show. Now that they're both back, both given the she's coming to save the show fanfare, I have to suspect that there's some level of competition between them. Heather mentioned a few times Tamra being the head cheerleader type of figure, so you know that that's something she thinks about, and you can watch a whole hour-long deep dive on how Tamra is pretty strategic on how she manages to get into and stay in that top spot. Plus, aside from their competitive nature, I think Heather may have honestly changed her views on Tamra and might even want vengeance on her. She talked many times about seeing through Tamra and knowing she has some sort of angle. She was pretty brutal at the finale party, spilling everything nasty Tamra had said about each of the women, plus she seemed genuinely disgusted by Tamra's treatment of Jenn, so I could see Heather wanting to launch a Tamra takedown of sorts next year. I'll get more into this in my predictions for next year's segment at the end of the video. But the rise of this feud was just electric. A problem they both have faced in the past is that they seem to come down way too hard whenever they're in conflict with another housewife. They come off as mean and kind of punching down in a way that makes you want to stick up for the victim, be it Alexis Bellino, Shannon Beador, or whoever else. So the two of them going at each other seems like a very fair fight. These are the heavyweights, y'all. I can't wait to see what happens between the two of them next season. Let's run through the cast and talk about their time on season 17 individually. Let's start with my girl Tamra Judge, who made her triumphant return back to the show after 2 seasons away. There was a lot of pressure on her to give us a show, and for that, she exceeded all expectations. She came in hot, ready to have her showdown with Shannon, eventually going up against Jenn and Heather. When I was going through the major stories of this season, it became clearer than ever just how integral Tamra was to the show. I'm pretty tuned into the conversation surrounding housewives, and I noticed that when the season started, a lot of people were Team Tamra, but as the season progressed, her popularity started tanking, and I think it's because she was being so messy and mean. A lot of people find her to be kind of put on, doing things solely for the show, and I think that's totally fair, but look at all that it produced. She is a necessary agent of chaos and kind of sacrifices likability for watchability, and you gotta give her props for that. There's not many housewives who would take this risk, but Tamra's able to get away with it. She's messy and meddling and can have terrible methods of making her point, but yet people still want to be her friend. People forgive her time and time again, and I see why. First off, the fear factor. A lot of people just don't want to go up against Tamra and will push aside their own resentments if it means they will get a break from her attacks. We saw this talked about pretty openly on the show this year. Tamra's not a fun enemy to have, but I think she can also be so fun that people would rather just push aside their misery for a chance to whoop it up with Tamra. She's a quintessential center orange girl. I think she also leads so much with her emotions and fearlessly speaks her truth and acts on impulse without regard for the consequences. I think her return was a total success, and she definitely proved just how vital she is to the Orange County landscape. Lover or hater, Tamra Judge proved her worth this season. But let's move on and talk about the new girl, Jenn Pedranti. Now, OC has not had a great track record for newbies lately. We've had a lot of one-and-dones like Jen Armstrong, season 15's Forgotten Liz, and rest in peace, Noella, who I was initially devastated to lose, but now I see that it was for the better. The people who have stuck around haven't been super popular, like Bronwyn or even Gina and Emily, who are only now, 5 seasons in, starting to get some fan love. So Jenn was working up against a lot of hesitation from the audience, but I think she was a hit. She had this juicy, scandalous story surrounding her, but was somehow able to come off likable throughout the whole thing, partly because Tamra was just so relentless in her pursuit to take her down that it gave Jenn kind of an underdog status, and the fact that she was just so likable. She has such a sweetness and a grace to her. She has a Disney princess quality, being surrounded by animals and children and just being so lovely and cute. I love the way she handled Gina's emotions around her affair, being understanding of Gina's perspective, but standing firm in her not being responsible for them. With Tamra, she came off as a bit of a pushover, accepting multiple apologies after Tamra would have an outburst, only for the cycle to repeat. But she did have an awareness that she was playing the fool in the situation, so so it'll be interesting to see how she handles it if the same thing happens again next season. After watching the show back and perhaps getting some confidence after she's gained some fan support, it'll be worth looking out for her to handle this with a bit more of a backbone next year. I noticed at the reunion that Heather and Gina stepped in multiple times to defend her, so she's definitely got some support on the cast going forward. I think the Ryan of it all makes her intriguing too. I want to see what Jenn sees in him. We didn't get a full answer as to why this man with the leopard collar is worth all of the torment Jenn is going through, so maybe now that the big story is all out there, we can see some of his good qualities going forward. So yeah, after years of misses on the OC casting team, they knocked it out of the park with Jenn. I'm excited to see what she brings us next year. Alright, but let's move on to Emily, who had a strong season. This year we saw her really settle into the stay-at-home mom lifestyle. We didn't see a super strong personal storyline type of presence from her, but what we got I enjoyed. She put a stronger focus on her daughter Annabelle, whom she is helping with her modeling career. I thought this was cute. We've seen a fair bit of her relationship with Shane, both positive and negative, and she's talked enough about her relationship with her own mother, but there hasn't been a strong focus on Emily with her kids. It gave us a new element of Emily, and Annabelle definitely has a great personality for a Real Housewives kid. She also focused a tiny bit more on her work with the Innocence Project, which I thought was really powerful. The story of the woman who was a nurse before being falsely imprisoned really outraged me, so I'm glad Emily used her platform to highlight this. Where Emily really shined, though, was in stirring up constant chaos with the other ladies. Jesus. From getting wasted at Heather's classy HD party to screaming at Shannon that she's Jacqueline Hyde while trying and failing to end her FaceTime call, she was just on fire this season. Heather was right in saying Emily was going to the Tamra School of Friendship because Emily was just constantly starting shit. Sometimes it felt a little put on, like would she be having this reaction if she weren't filmed? But whatever, they all do it. And I'd rather see someone overplaying their personality than underplaying it. But we also got a little more insight into why she has these reactions, with her telling Heather that this was how she and her sister would communicate. She says she's working on it, but that would kind of compromise her job as a housewife, so I don't know. Ultimately, I think Emily has become a vital part of the cast, and with her buddying up to Tamra, she's only further entrenched. She's messier than ever, and for that, we thank her. But let's move on to the other half of Gemily, Gina. Now, I know Gina isn't super popular, but I really like her. Is she one of my top 5 housewives? No, but she's a solid part of the current OC cast. Personally, she was more focused on starting her career as a real estate agent, which, as I've learned from watching an insane amount of Real Housewives, can be a very lucrative career, so you never know. We could see Gina on a Mauricio Umansky style come up one of these days. We also saw more of her time with her boyfriend Travis, and they're just super cute to me. He's not like a star power shine on camera type of person, but seems to be a really stable force for Gina, and it seems like they're building a really nice life together. Gina ended the season telling us she's ready for an engagement, so we could get another OC wedding soon. She also opened up a lot more about her feelings regarding her ex Matt's infidelity, and we saw her move forward with forging a friendship with him and his girlfriend Britt. I wonder how it would go if she was brought on the show. I don't know a lot about her besides the fact that she looks a lot like Kelly Dodd, but it would be a new dynamic for the show and could bring Gina into the focus a bit more. I didn't like how quickly Gina turned on Heather. It did seem kind of like she was looking for a problem so she could keep a place in the cool girl group, but she was able to come back to her senses, and judging by the reunion, it seems like Gina and Heather are back on. I know Gina is the cast member a lot of people seem the least enthused by, but I feel like she's well entrenched in the group and has been on an upward trajectory. The show seems to be investing in her, showing more of her home life. She's also a key ally for Heather and has this intense beef with Shannon, so I think there's a path forward for her on the show. But let's take a dip into the Friends of pool and talk about Taylor Armstrong, who made history by being the first ever cast member to officially change franchises. I've seen some people saying she was a flop, but I disagree. I thought she infused an element of chaos and comedy, and I really enjoyed what she brought. She kept things silly by going after Heather's IMDb, which ended up revealing an emotional depth to Heather I didn't know was there. What was really striking to me was how different she was compared to her time on Beverly Hills. When she was announced, I didn't really know what to expect, as Beverly Hills captured an insanely chaotic time in her life, so I wondered if what we knew of Taylor wasn't really her at her core. It was her reacting to extreme instability and tragedy, and often when we go through times like these, we're acting in survival mode and our true nature doesn't always shine through. I think this was definitely the case with Taylor. We saw that she's really pretty normal and goofy. One criticism I have is that she really focused on evoking some of her biggest moments on Beverly Hills. There was a lot of mention of the cotton candy and the cat meme, but we didn't get much insight into the journey from then till now. I think a lot of this was just because we were only seeing her as a friend rather than getting any solo scenes, so my potentially hot take is that Taylor should be upgraded. I want to learn more about the time between Beverly Hills and OC and learn about that journey. She also does a lot of work with domestic violence charities, and I think that would be such a powerful thing to bring more attention to. All in all, she was fun, sloppy, and fit in well. The crossover was a success in my eyes. But let's keep this friend train going and talk about Vicki. Or I guess she was more of a guest, but whatever. When Tamra was announced back, I think we all wondered if we'd be seeing Vicki make an appearance, and of course she did, showing up for a Tres Amigas lunch, going as herself to the You Do Me and I Do You party, and surprising the women on the cast trip to Mexico. I mean, can the OC girls go to Mexico and not invite Vicki? Certainly not. I thought she was really fun on the show. She overly inserted herself into Jenn's business, confirming what everyone already knew in that Tamra was spreading all of this all over town. I think she was also kind of projecting her own stuff with the Brooke situation. It's clear that the whole thing is still weighing her down. But aside from that, she was mostly just there for the laughs and to whoop it up. It was absolutely hilarious when she tried to paint herself as the good one and anti-drama to the staff in Mexico, only for the editors to pair it with a montage of the Gunvalsonian greatest hits, proving that she is in fact not anti-drama. I'm kind of back and forth on if Vicki should come back full-time or have more of a role. I love watching Vicki and think that she always delivers in her solo scenes, but the dynamic is so good now that I'm not sure I want Vicki's strong presence to throw it off. She'll also be a strong ally for Tamra unless something happens between the two, and I don't know if we need to give Tamra more power as she heads into battle against Heather Dubrow next season. But no matter what happens, it was fun to see the OG of the OC whooping it up this season. Alright, but let's move on to Shannon. She went a little off the rails this season, as she is wont to do. After a pretty good season 16, she kind of fell a bit in popularity from what I saw from fan chatter online. And I think that's fair. When she's with Tamra, she kind of falls into sidekick status, letting Tamra lead the way, and once the two got back together, we did see Shannon getting easily riled up by Tamra and abandoning her friendship with Heather. Emotionally, she was a roller coaster this season. She threw off her mic and stormed out of scenes and broke the fourth wall at least 3 times this season. With other housewives, it might be annoying if they ran away like this, but for Shannon, it just works. It feels almost perverse, but I feel like her emotional outbursts are what make her so entertaining. Like, I don't want her to suffer, but when she does, it makes for really good TV. There was a lot of discussion about her drinking, and we would find out on social media and later at the reunion that she ended up getting a DUI shortly after filming the reunion. Not only that, but she drove into a house and then pretended to be walking her dog afterwards, so it was a bad situation. Thank God nobody was hurt due to her terrible decisions, because this was just so reckless. She's already been sentenced to probation, a very light sentencing, but seems to at least be talking like it was a wake-up call. She said at Bravocon she completed a 28-day program with an emphasis on alcohol and said she was no longer seeing John, so we can only wish that she takes this as seriously as she should. I do wonder what a sober Shannon would look like if she chooses or is court-ordered not to drink anymore. Alcohol has been such a part of quote-unquote fun Shannon, and tequila shots are essentially the secret handshake for the Tres Amigas, so it'll be a big change. I would say that it will cause her to be a bit more emotionally stable, but if we look at past instances of housewives stopping drinking, it seems like we tend to see the opposite, as with Gina this season and Bronwyn on season 14. It seems like anything that's been emotionally repressed comes barreling out with newfound sobriety, so I worry how that could go for Shannon, given how deeply she seems to already feel, even with the muting properties of alcohol. If I were being unselfish, I'd probably wish for her to take a season or 2 off so she can do this introspection without cameras in her face, but I don't really know if that's a decision she'd make on her own. She talked a lot about the financial stress she feels with all of her girls in college, so I don't know if taking some time off is practical for her financially. So I think we'll see her back and perhaps see whole new layers of Shannon next season. She's officially an empty nester and is single, so it'll be interesting to see how she handles all of this change. And last, Heather. Dare I say this was her best season yet? I've always liked watching Heather, and I think the show is better when she's on, but this season I started to veer more into Stan territory, and I think that's because she showed us a lot more emotional depth than she has in the past. We never really see her coming from a place of insecurity, so to see her break down over her decision to prioritize her family over her career really made me see her more fully as a person, rather than just this fabulous woman who has it all. I really loved hearing her perspective on getting back into the business. She mentioned a few times that while some of the projects she was taking on, like launching this Fireside app with Mark Cuban, weren't necessarily her end goal, but work begets work, and it's worth taking things on if it means your face will be out there. I found this super inspiring and motivating. I also really loved her and Terry this season. I've always thought they were a great couple who play off each other really well, so I was concerned and shocked when the rumor mill started churning that there was trouble between the two of them. We didn't see much of this at all highlighted on the show, which kind of feeds into the conspiracy theory that this season, which had a very long wait between filming, wrapping, and airing, was delayed due to Dubrow's demands. I'm not saying I believe it, I'm just saying it was a theory. But we got to see the two of them enter a new phase of life as their 2 oldest went off to college. We saw them sell Chateau Dubrow, which the editors gave a fantastic in memoriam style montage that made me tear up and then laugh because I was crying about a rich lady selling her house. Like, why am I so attached? But whatever, I'm sure you can relate. They also gave us this absurdly romantic scene of the 2 of them dressed down in their bathroom, talking about their next moves, and I just found the whole thing so touching and sweet.
At the end of the day,
it's just you and me.
This was definitely a hard season for her socially. She achieved something I never thought she could, underdog status, while dealing with her gang up, and I'm a sucker for an underdog. But we also saw her get some of the reins back when she was able to get Gina and then Emily back on her side. I've always liked Heather, but this was the season I really grew to love her. Alright, but let's do as Gina does with her kids at the dinner table and talk about the peaks and the pits of the season, starting of course positively with the peaks. It's honestly like everything to me. After kind of oscillating between bad, mediocre, and only sorta good seasons since season 11, this was truly a fantastic next season. The cast was just perfection, with a good blend of blasts from the past and great new additions. The relationships felt authentic, and the drama mostly felt genuine. They really got it right this year. I thought they did a great job with nods to the past without seeming bogged down in what once was. When it was relevant, we get a flashback to some past moment, which was fun, but it was clear that the show was focused on the present. One kind of random thing I liked was some of the creative editing choices. There was a few times where instead of getting a traditional previously on segment to start the episode, they'd accomplish the task through someone telling another about the event or things like that. I also liked them constantly showing up to dinner by boat. It was just so over the top and gave us a whole new setting for drama to occur. I like the beachy vibes they've been infusing more and more. I like the scenes at the pier and the restaurants with beachfront views. It just helps differentiate OC from other cities and creates more of a solid backdrop for where these ladies are living their lives. An idea I had was to play up the suburbia vibe of it all. I love the framing of the trailer, and I'd like to see more of that kind of stuff to cutesify the show in a way. I think the editors are good, but I've noticed that on other shows like Atlanta, Potomac, and Salt Lake City, they have a little bit more fun with the editing, and I think infusing this could make OC even better. They should bring back Bunko Night and continuously go to Javier's and The Quiet Woman. Keep doing pool parties and stopping by each other's houses and businesses. Just keep that feel of the ritzy suburbs. That's what makes OC, OC. And now onto the pits. There's really not much. I'm like having to stretch to find them, but I guess I would have liked more focus on Taylor's time between Beverly Hills and OC, rather than the superficial nods to some of her past moments. There's a lot more depth to Taylor's story than what she was showing. This seems to have been Taylor's choice, so hopefully if she returns, she'll feel confident that we remember her time on Beverly Hills, but are ready to move on. But yeah, I think that's about it. I really loved this season. But let's look to the future and predict what we could potentially see next year. This is just speculation, but I love predicting things like this, so I'm just gonna have fun with it and project how I could potentially see things unfolding. First, the feuds. I think Shannon versus Gina will be a big one early on next season. A major source of tension in their relationship was Shannon holding the way she helped Gina with her DUI over her head, and Shannon's grievances with Gina speaking about her drinking, so I have to imagine Gina is going to have a lot to say about Shannon's DUI. There's a chance Gina could come in tenderly and be a source of understanding for Shannon, but given the viciousness between the two at the reunion, I wouldn't really expect it. Another I think will be Heather versus Tamra. I think they'll start off fine on the surface, playing nice, but just waiting to pounce and stir things up against each other as soon as any negative word is uttered. If I had to guess who will kick things off, it would be Tamra, obviously. I think if we get to a point where the two are openly aggressive with each other, it'll be some of the best television we've ever seen. As mentioned, the two are very evenly matched and worthy opponents of the other, so it'll be intense and underhanded and give us a lot to talk about. I'd also be interested to see what the two of them going at it does to the rest of the cast. This season, Tamra was launching kind of a guerrilla warfare, unexpected attack, so Heather wasn't prepared, but now that she knows what's up, I think she'll do what she can to keep her allies on her side. I think her most key ally is Gina, as she's kind of her best option. But where this gets complicated is the Gemily of it all, as Emily seems to really value her newfound friendship with Tamra, and based on this past season, has a major bone with Heather, going after her relentlessly to the point where Heather questioned if she was just looking for a problem. Now, if an all-out war breaks out between Heather and Tamra, and Gina and Emily are waving opposing flags, what does that do to their friendship? Could we see a proxy war of sorts between the two? If we did, I think it would be sad for them, of course, but it would completely change up their role on the show, because that's kind of their shtick, that they have this real friendship. Their duo status is so secure that they were on the Besties panel at Bravocon. One of their gripes with Heather was that she advised them to differentiate themselves, so yeah, it would be something new and big for both of them if they were to have a genuine big fight. We've seen them spar, and it's always emotional, but they're always able to make up shortly after. If they were to have a true falling out, I think it would devastate them both. Tamra would definitely have Shannon, that's a given, as Shannon and Heather's relationship has been marred with tension from the moment they laid eyes on each other, and even when they're good, there seems to be some sort of wall-up that stops them from truly getting close. Plus, Shannon's kind of going through some stuff, so I think Tamra will abstain from antagonizing Shannon next season. Jen, I think, would go to Heather. Tamra burned the bridge with Jen, built it back up, burned it again, built it back up, burned it again. We could go on and on. Moral of the story is Jen's probably not feeling so trusting of Tamra. The worst thing Heather's done to Jen was fall asleep on her when they were supposed to go out in Mexico. We also saw Heather defending Jen a lot at the reunion, so I think she'll pull her over to her side. Those are the two big feuds I would expect, but let me know if there's any potential for anyone else. And aside from that, I think we'll get even more focus on Jen's relationship. I kind of want this to die down fairly early on because it was so heavily featured this season that I think it may start to feel beaten to death if we spend too much time on it, but I'm sure we'll get some chatter about it. I think Heather may pursue her acting career a little more heavily now that she's got a place in Beverly Hills. I would definitely expect a cameo from someone on the Beverly Hills cast. The most likely candidate, I think, being Garcelle, as they could discuss acting and share some gossip about the other ladies. This, of course, could open the door a little more widely to a Dubrow migration to Beverly Hills, but who knows? Again, that's not my wish. But let me know if it is yours. I also wonder if Tamra's podcast will come more into the light. We got some brief chatter about it and a phone call cameo from our co-host, Queen of Eliciting Hate, Teddy Jo Mellencamp, but given what a big part of Tamra's life it seems to be, we didn't get nearly as much as I was expecting. I wonder if the show wants to shy away from it, as it breaks down the fourth wall quite severely, but I think it could be cool to see the ins and outs of what goes into making the pod. So yeah, those are just the things I possibly see setting up next season. Let me know if you foresee anything else happening. So yeah, I absolutely love this season, and I'm stoked to see OC reaching such highs. But let me know what you thought of this season. And if you enjoyed the video, I'd love it if you subscribed to the channel and shared it with anyone you think would like it. If you want to chat on social media, I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at DeeplySuperFish. But I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye!